welcome back to the same spot where you saw me last time. My name is Maria Mela and I am a design student at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. In my last video, we spoke and learned a little bit about pathways of the home, what they are and how to find them. Today I thought I would bring you something a little bit more interesting and some might even say controversial, and that is hostel architecture, commonly known as hostel design. For those of you who don't know, in the design world there is universal design and hostel design. I'll be diving deep into hostel design today, but in order to do that, I think you should know what is at the other end of the spectrum. As per the website for universal design, this term is defined as the design of buildings, products, environments to make them accessible to all people, regardless of age, disability, or any other factor. So for instance, an example of universal design would be automatic doors. They open through motion sensors, allowing anyone to get through the door hands-free. So it doesn't really matter if you are a wheelchair user or a parent with a stroller or a person carrying a million bags. You have equal access to the building in the same way others do. This kind of design is inclusive, and it is about making design decisions that take away barriers. Hostel design, on the other hand, is not quite that forgiving. In fact, it is meant to keep certain demographics away. And you might be asking, who would consciously design against someone else? But you would be surprised by how many people do it, and you might even see it on a daily basis and not even notice. One of the most common examples from back in the 20s were bridges designed by Robert Moses. These were located in Long Island and were predominantly known for being very low. Not low enough for cars to go through, which were usually owned by white people, but low enough for buses to not fit under. And at the time, buses were ridden mainly by black people. Over the years, hostel architecture has changed its demographics several times. And don't get me wrong, there are always designs that are specifically made to exclude certain demographics. But what I have seen while doing my research for this video is that hostel design depends on public perception. In the 18th century, for example, racist designs predominated, but then we saw a transition to designing against disabilities, and then most recently we have seen a shift to anti-homeless designs. Again, all of these can happen concurrently, and they do, but sometimes we notice trends in designs that are hard to avoid. And this happens mostly because once society decides to accept the marginalized community, then designs against them will not necessarily be as supported as before. Two of the biggest kinds of hostile designs nowadays are the two I just mentioned: anti-disability design and anti-homeless design. Anti-disability design, as the name says, it is meant to purposefully exclude people with disabilities. Designer Liz Jackson covers a lot about this in her interview with CBC Radio back in 2019. And in it, she explains how anti-disability design is not only found in places that don't facilitate access for people with disabilities, but also in flashy products that are marketed for problems they didn't even know they had. This is what she calls disability dongles. In simpler terms, it is when a designer creates something new, something ideal, and maybe even gets praised for it by the media and possibly even by the general audience, but the thought-to-be users don't agree as much. Maybe because it doesn't really fit their needs, or it's too pricey, or ironically, it's too inaccessible. Creating solutions just to be at the top of the innovation race is also a form of hostile design because, as Liz Jackson says, what they need is access. This means more ramps, more elevators, more access to day-to-day lives. And you might say, well, isn't a design that is somewhat intended for them still beneficial? And the answer is not really, because when designers stop thinking about their users' actual needs in the process to satisfy their own innovative cravings, they deviate the whole conversation by attracting people to a product that is not really helpful and making people believe that this is what people with disabilities actually need. This could look in the form of a super advanced automatic wheelchair that is $30,000 or a $10,000 walker. One of these actually exists. At the point when it becomes too inaccessible, whether it is because of price or because it is so technologically advanced that the user finds a hard time knowing how to use it or repair it if it damages, then this becomes hostile design. And then finally we have anti-homeless design, which has become a much more prominent form of hostile design in the past few years. One that you are more likely to have seen around and think it was designed for your own visual or physical benefit. but in reality it is to marginalize and affect the homeless much more than what they currently are. I'll give you a few examples. Have you ever seen random public spaces with poles or spikes or small balls? Okay, I bet you have seen at least one of them. Well, what about benches with separators? Everything I just showed you are designs made so that homeless people cannot sleep or rest in these areas. And this is the result. A lot of the time this happens in bus stops too, or corners of buildings, because they're much more prone to have homeless people sleep in them. Why? Because these are spaces where homeless people can rest and be sure not to be rained or snowed on. Anti-homeless design takes place in a much more subtle manner that most people don't even realize they see them on a daily basis. In the attempt to bring awareness, I have seen a few pictures of either homeless people begging for a chance to be treated fairly or other people calling out on hostile designs. Sadly, in our times, in order for you to get equality as a member of a marginalized group, you have to prove that you're worth it. You have to prove that you're worth designing for. And all these groups have shown not to be in the eyes of hostile designers by just being themselves. I once read that accessibility is not only good design, but a civil right. And if there's anything I want you to take away from this video, it's exactly that. Let's try to be more conscious about what we create as designers and what we support as viewers. I hope you learned something new today. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Maria Mala, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.